if we were in the room advising the president, my question would be, how do we advance American interests today? And I believe that involves peace in Ukraine as quickly as we can get there on reasonable terms while weakening the Russia-China alliance and getting the Russian military presence out of the West. And my question for Ambassador Bolton, with due respect, is, because I think it's an important and relevant conversation, how do you define success in this Ukraine war? What is the war objective, and how do you define success? Be specific.
Yes,
Getting Putin to move is not specific. Specifically.
I can state it very simply. It's the declared position of every member of NATO right now, the full restoration of Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity. Now, let me ask you a question.
Well, let me just respond.
Let Ambassador Bolton.
Come on now. Well, this is not a campaign debate. Not a campaign debate.
I'll let you.
Does that mean actually the pre-war lines? The pre-war lines.
I answered your question. Now you
didn't answer if it was the pre-war lines.
1-1, gentlemen.
Yeah. My question is, Senator J.D. Vance has laid out what he thinks a peace deal for Ukraine should look like. A ceasefire in place, Russia keeps the territory it holds, demilitarized zone between the two. He omits the fact there's a different border between Russia and Ukraine, but demilitarized zone, and Ukraine agrees not to join NATO. Do you agree with that?
Well, I'm going to first require an understanding of what your answer was to my question to be able to respond to it. And I think the question is, we can actually disagree about what the objective is or whether we should pursue that objective, but we should understand what the objective actually is. So as I understand your response, but I want to make sure I properly understand it before engaging, your view is that it has to be the pre-war boundaries that have to be restored to Ukraine. That is the war objective that we're solving for. That's what I take as my understanding of your question.
That is my position and the present position of the entire NATO alliance.
And again, just descriptive here, not sort of drawing an argument, but just to get the viewpoints on the table. So is Crimea then part of Russia, or is it part of Ukraine?
It's part of Ukraine, as the Russian Federation agreed at the Belavezia Agreement in 1992.
So I think that's at least constructive, because we are able to have a discussion where we know what we're disagreeing on. I think it is absolutely not only unrealistic, it is unfathomable that from these conditions, we're going to get to a place where somehow, by waving a magic wand, Crimea is going to be returned to Ukraine, Zaporizhia, talking about all of the other parts that are occupied today. That's just not going to happen. It is lunacy. And one example of how that's lunacy is, let's just track the recent history. Let's not debate 40 years ago. We could go back that far too. Let's debate the last 2 years. In 2022, Zelensky was willing to negotiate terms of peace before the West, including Boris Johnson, but also the United States, goaded him out of negotiating for peace then. Had Zelensky negotiated in April of 2022 without being goaded by the West, Ukraine would have done a better deal territorially than they could possibly do right now or any time in the foreseeable future. And I think that that is a damning indictment of our own interventionist policies. It wasn't not only not good for the United States, where we've now spent $175 billion more since then, that frankly we could have used to protect our own borders, as well as we wish to protect Ukraine's. But it hasn't even served Ukraine's best interests, where you have 1 million people across both Ukraine and Russia that have either been killed or injured in the conflict since then. So the fact of the matter is, our increased engagement since then has actually been a disservice, not just to the United States, but also to even Ukraine itself, in a way that it's just, for anybody following this war, the idea that somehow Crimea, we have a plan possibly for Crimea, let alone the other regions, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, being restored to Ukraine, this is mythology. And I don't think that it's going to happen just by wishing it into existence, in contrast to a reasonably negotiated deal that achieves peace in the near term and actually achieves other U.S. objectives like weakening the Russia-China alliance in the process, which I do believe is a far more realistic, important, and achievable goal along the way.